Emma Carter had learned the art of resilience at an age when most people were still figuring out who they wanted to be. At 23 years old, she had already faced more challenges than many people twice her age. Her days began early and ended late, filled with long shifts at Sonny's Diner, a quaint yet worn-down eatery in the heart of Chicago. With its scuffed linoleum floors, mismatched furniture, and an aging jukebox that seemed perpetually stuck in the 1980s, the diner wasn't much to look at. But for Emma, it was her lifeline. The place where she earned enough to scrape by and support her younger sister, Mia. The customers at Sonny's came from all walks of life: construction workers on their lunch breaks, elderly couples seeking comfort in familiar surroundings, and the occasional lost soul wandering in for a cup of coffee and a moment of warmth. Emma greeted each of them with the same radiant smile, her warmth and sincerity standing out in a city often characterized by its cold, impersonal pace. "Hey, Emma, can I get a refill over here?" called out Mr. Henderson, a regular who always occupied the corner booth. "Coming right up, Mr. H," Emma replied, her voice cheerful despite the ache in her feet from hours of standing. She grabbed the coffee pot and made her way to his table, pouring the steaming liquid into his cup. "You're too good to us, kid," Mr. Henderson said with a chuckle. "Don't know how you do it." Emma simply shrugged, her smile never wavering. "Somebody's got to keep this place running smoothly," she teased. But the truth was, her relentless positivity masked a mountain of worries she carried every day. Emma had been thrust into adulthood far too soon. When her parents died in a car accident 5 years ago, she became Mia's guardian. At just 18, she had to figure out how to juggle her own grief, her sister's well-being, and the overwhelming responsibilities of adulthood. She had given up her dream of attending college to work full-time, determined to provide Mia with a stable home and the opportunities she herself had been forced to forego. Even though life was a constant struggle, Emma clung to hope. She dreamed of one day owning her own cafe, a place where anyone, no matter their circumstances, could find a warm meal and a kind word. It was a lofty dream, but one that kept her going on the toughest days. After her shift ended each night, Emma had a routine. She would pack up any leftover food that couldn't be sold the next day and head out into the city streets. With a backpack full of sandwiches, soups, and pastries, she would distribute meals to the homeless. It wasn't much, but it was her way of giving back. Her small act of rebellion against a world that often seemed indifferent to suffering. That evening, as she walked home with her empty backpack slung over one shoulder, Emma passed by the old playground where she and Mia used to play as kids. The swings creaked in the wind, and for a moment, nostalgia washed over her. She thought about the carefree days of her childhood before life became so complicated. She sighed, adjusting her coat against the cold. Her dreams of a better future felt distant, but she refused to give up. Somewhere deep down, she believed that her kindness and hard work would one day be rewarded, even if she couldn't yet see how. The next day brought a relentless downpour, the kind that turned the city into a maze of puddles and left everyone rushing for cover. Rain pelted the windows of Sonny's Diner in rhythmic patterns, creating a soothing backdrop to an otherwise quiet afternoon. Business was slow. Most people preferred to stay indoors rather than brave the weather. Emma kept herself busy by cleaning tables and refilling salt shakers, that her mind drifting to Mia's upcoming school trip and how she'd scrape together the money to pay for it. By the time her shift ended, the rain showed no sign of letting up. Emma pulled on her threadbare jacket and stepped outside, her sneakers splashing into a puddle the moment she hit the sidewalk. She pulled her hood up, not that it made much difference, and started the familiar walk home. As she turned the corner onto a quieter street, she noticed a small figure huddled under the shelter of a bus stop. Even from a distance, she could see the boy's trembling shoulders, his thin arms wrapped tightly around himself. He couldn't have been older than 10. Emma's heart clenched. She approached cautiously, not wanting to startle him. "Hey there," she said softly, kneeling beside him. The boy flinched at the sound of her voice, but quickly relaxed when he saw her kind expression. He looked up at her with wide, tear-filled eyes. I don't have anywhere to go," he mumbled, his voice barely audible over the rain. "What's your name?" Emma asked, her tone gentle and reassuring. "Ben," he whispered. Well, Ben, she said with a warm smile, how about we get you out of this rain? I work at a diner just down the street. We can get you some hot food and a place to sit for a while. Does that sound okay? Ben hesitated, his small frame shaking from the cold, but the desperation in his eyes won out. He nodded slowly. Emma stood and offered him her hand. Together, they walked through the rain to Sonny's diner, Emma shielding him as best she could. Once inside, she led him to a booth and wrapped him in one of the blankets kept in the back for emergencies. Here, she said, placing a steaming bowl of tomato soup in front of him. Eat up. It'll help you warm up. Ben didn't need to be told twice. He devoured the soup, his trembling hands clutching the spoon as though it were a lifeline. As he ate, Emma sat across from him, gently coaxing out his story. He told her about running away from a foster home where he felt neglected and unwanted. Emma listened intently, her heart breaking for him. She promised to help him find a better situation, even if it meant dipping into her own meager savings to do so. Unbeknownst to Emma, her actions were being observed. Parked across the street in a sleek black car, Alexander Hayes sat in silence, his eyes fixed on the scene unfolding inside the diner. He had pulled over to check his emails, but found himself captivated by the young woman's kindness. For a man who had built his empire on ruthless decisions and calculated risks, witnessing Emma's compassion was a revelation. Her selflessness, her willingness to give without expecting anything in return, stirred something deep within him, a longing he hadn't felt in years. As Emma sat with Ben, offering him comfort and reassurance, Alexander couldn't look away. He didn't know it yet, but this moment would mark the beginning of a journey that would change both their lives forever. Alexander Hayes wasn't a man who wasted time. At just 36 years old, he had carved out an empire from the ground up, his name synonymous with power, wealth, and relentless ambition. Yet, as he sat in his car that rainy evening, watching Emma's act of kindness through the diner window, something stirred within him, a feeling he couldn't quite define. His driver cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Should we continue to the office, Mr. Hayes?" Alexander glanced at his watch. He had meetings scheduled, deals to finalize, and yet he found himself reluctant to leave. "Not yet," he replied, his gaze fixed on Emma. He observed her as she interacted with the boy, her face a portrait of warmth and empathy. The way she leaned forward, her expression attentive as the boy spoke, showed a sincerity that was almost disarming. It was a stark contrast to the world Alexander inhabited, a world where every smile hid an agenda and every gesture came with strings attached. As the rain continued to pour, Alexander thought about how different Emma seemed from anyone he'd ever encountered. In his world, kindness was a commodity, bought and sold like stocks on the market. But here was a woman who gave freely, without expectation. It intrigued him, even unsettled him. When the boy finally finished his meal and Emma began tidying up, Alexander made a decision. "Take note of this diner," he told his driver. "I want to know everything about it, and about her." The driver, accustomed to Alexander's eccentric requests, nodded without question. "Understood, sir." As the car pulled away from the curb, Alexander leaned back in his seat, his thoughts consumed by the woman in the diner. He didn't understand why she had made such an impression on him, but he couldn't ignore it. For the first time in years, Alexander Hayes felt a spark of curiosity that had nothing to do with business or profit. Emma's life continued as it always had, filled with long shifts at the diner, late-night walks home, and an unwavering determination to make ends meet. The encounter with Ben stayed with her, his gratitude fueling her resolve. She often wondered what had become of him, hoping he'd found a safe place to stay. Her younger sister, Mia, remained her greatest motivation. At 16, Mia was bright, ambitious, and full of dreams that Emma was determined to help her achieve. Every penny Emma earned went toward ensuring Mia could stay in school and participate in activities that would prepare her for college. One evening, as Emma prepared dinner in their tiny apartment, Mia sat at the kitchen table, her textbooks spread out in front of her. "You're amazing. You know that?" Mia said suddenly, looking up from her homework. Emma paused, a wooden spoon in her hand. "What makes you say that? You work so hard and you still find time to help other people. Like that little boy at the diner," Mia said, her voice filled with admiration. "I don't know how you do it." Emma smiled, her chest tightening with emotion. "I do it for you. she said simply. And because if we don't look out for each other, who will? Despite her struggles, Emma found moments of joy in the simple things, watching Mia laugh, sharing stories with regular customers at the diner, and even her late-night walks through the city, which gave her time to dream about a brighter future. Meanwhile, Alexander Hayes couldn't stop thinking about her. The research his team had conducted revealed little. A young woman working tirelessly to support her sister, with no significant connections or remarkable background. Yet, it was precisely her ordinary life that fascinated him. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, Alexander found himself driven by an impulse he didn't fully understand. He told his driver to take him to Sonny's diner. When he stepped through the door, the bell above jingled softly, drawing Emma's attention. She looked up from the counter where she was preparing an order, her eyes meeting his. Alexander was struck by how different she looked in person. The warmth in her gaze, the easy way she carried herself, it was all more captivating than he had imagined. "Welcome to Sonny's," Emma said with a smile, her tone cheerful despite the exhaustion in her eyes. "Grab a seat wherever you'd like." Alexander chose a booth near the window, his tailored suit an odd contrast to the diner's humble surroundings. Emma approached with her notepad in hand, her smile never faltering. "What can I get for you?" she asked, her voice light and welcoming. Alexander hesitated for a moment before responding. "What do you recommend?" Emma tilted her head thoughtfully. "Our pot roast is pretty popular, and the apple pie is made fresh every morning." "Then I'll have both," he said, handing her the menu. As she walked away to place his order, Alexander found himself studying her. She moved with a quiet confidence, greeting customers by name and chatting with them as if they were old friends. It was clear she was well loved here, her presence bringing a sense of comfort to everyone around her. When Emma returned with his meal, she noticed his intense gaze and felt a flicker of curiosity. "First time here?" she asked, setting the plate in front of him. Alexander nodded. "I passed by a few times, thought I'd finally stop in." "Well, I hope we live up to your expectations," she said with a grin before heading off to tend to another table. As Alexander ate, he couldn't help but observe her interactions with the other customers. Her laughter rang out as she joked with Mr. Henderson, and she leaned down to speak gently to a young couple struggling to calm their fussy baby. Every action reinforced the impression he had formed of her, a woman who gave so much of herself, even when she had little to spare. Before leaving, Alexander discreetly placed an envelope under his plate. Inside was a significant tip, far more than the cost of his meal, along with a simple note, "For the kindness you show to others." When Emma found the envelope later, she was stunned. The money was more than she had ever seen in one place, and the note left her both touched and curious. She looked around the diner, hoping to catch sight of the man who had left it, but he was already gone. As Emma stood there holding the envelope, a sense of unease mingled with gratitude. Who was this mysterious stranger, and why had he been so generous? Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a connection that would change her life forever. The following days at Sonny's diner passed like any other for Emma. She filled coffee cups, balanced trays of food, and exchanged kind words with customers. But her thoughts often drifted to the man in the tailored suit who had left the envelope. Who was he? What had compelled him to leave such an extraordinary tip? The envelope remained tucked safely in her drawer at home. Despite her financial struggles, Emma hesitated to use the money. It felt too surreal, and as if spending it might break the spell of its mysterious arrival. Then, one quiet evening, as Emma cleaned the counter and prepared to close for the night, the bell above the diner's door jingled. She turned, expecting a regular, but her breath hitched slightly when she saw him, the same man who had left the envelope. Alexander Hayes entered the diner with an air of quiet confidence, his tailored suit once again an odd contrast to the humble surroundings. He scanned the room briefly before his eyes found Emma, and for a fleeting moment their gazes locked. "Welcome back," Emma greeted him, her smile warm but tinged with curiosity. She grabbed a menu and led him to a booth near the window. "Decided to give us another try?" Alexander settled into the seat, his expression calm and unreadable. "I enjoyed my last visit," he said, his deep voice carrying a note of sincerity. "I thought I'd return." Emma handed him the menu, though he hardly glanced at it. "I'll take your recommendation again," he said. She chuckled softly. "Pot roast and apple pie it is." As Emma moved to prepare his order, she couldn't shake the feeling that this man was different. There was an intensity to him, a quiet but undeniable presence that made her wonder what kind of life he led outside the walls of Sonny's diner. When she returned with his food, Emma decided to address the elephant in the room. "You're the one who left the envelope, aren't you?" she asked, setting the plate down in front of him. Alexander didn't deny it. "I thought it was the least I could do," he said simply. Emma frowned slightly, her curiosity deepening. "Why? I mean, it was very generous, but why me?" For a moment, Alexander seemed to weigh his words. "Because kindness deserves recognition," he said finally, "and from what I've seen, you embody it in a way that's rare." His answer left Emma momentarily speechless. She didn't know how to respond, so she gave him a small smile and excused herself to check on other customers. As the evening wore on, Alexander remained at the booth, quietly observing the life around him. He watched as Emma handled each customer with the same warmth and attentiveness, her energy unwavering despite the late hour. When he finally rose to leave, Alexander left another envelope on the table. This time, it wasn't just money, it included a handwritten note. "Thank you for reminding me that there's still good in the world." Emma stood frozen in the empty diner, staring at the envelope left behind by the mysterious customer. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, revealing another substantial amount of money and the heartfelt note inside. The words struck a chord deep within her. "Thank you for reminding me that there's still good in the world." They were simple yet profound, and for reasons she couldn't fully articulate, they brought tears to her eyes. She slid into the booth where the man had been sitting, her mind racing with questions. Who was he? Why was he so invested in her life? And why did his words feel so personal, as if he understood her struggles in a way no one else did? The next morning, Emma shared the story with Mia over breakfast. "Another envelope?" Mia exclaimed, her eyes wide. "Emma, who is this guy?" Emma shook her head, still trying to process it herself. "I don't know. He's different, kind, but reserved. I can't figure him out." Mia grinned mischievously. "Maybe he's some kind of secret millionaire who fell in love with you at first sight." Emma laughed, though the thought left her oddly unsettled. "Don't be ridiculous. He's just being generous, that's all." Despite her words, Emma couldn't deny that the man's actions had shaken something loose inside her. She'd spent so long focused on survival, on supporting Mia and keeping their lives afloat, that she hadn't allowed herself to think beyond the day-to-day. But now this stranger had given her something she hadn't felt in years: hope. At the diner, her coworkers noticed the change in her demeanor. "You've been smiling all morning," one of them teased. "What's got you in such a good mood?" Emma shrugged, brushing off the comment, but the truth was that she felt lighter. The man's gesture had reminded her that there were still people in the world who cared, who wanted to make a difference. As she wiped down the counter that afternoon, Emma caught herself glancing toward the door, half expecting him to walk in again. Part of her wanted to thank him properly, to express just how much his generosity had meant to her. But the man didn't return that day, leaving Emma with nothing but his note and the lingering sense that their paths would cross again. What Emma didn't know was that Alexander Hayes had been watching her reaction from afar, his car parked discreetly down the street. He wasn't ready to reveal everything yet, his identity, his intentions, but he couldn't deny the pull he felt toward her. As the days passed, Alexander found himself thinking about Emma more often than he cared to admit. She was unlike anyone he'd ever met, and her selflessness had struck a chord in him that no amount of success or wealth had ever managed to touch. For the first time in years, Alexander felt compelled to do more than simply observe. He wanted to understand the woman behind the warmth and kindness, to uncover the strength that allowed her to give so much despite having so little. And so he made a decision. He would return to Sonny's diner, not as a mysterious stranger, but as a man determined to learn more about Emma and the life she led. The days at Sonny's diner moved along with their usual rhythm, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling of anticipation. She found herself glancing at the door every time the bell jingled, wondering if the mysterious man would return. It was a chilly Thursday evening when the moment she'd been waiting for finally arrived. Emma was refilling the sugar dispensers when she heard the familiar jingle of the bell. Looking up, she saw him, the man with the tailored suit, his presence as striking as before. This time, he didn't linger by the entrance. He walked straight to the counter, his eyes locking with hers. Emma quickly composed herself, offering him a smile. "Welcome back," she said, setting the sugar dispenser aside. "You're becoming a regular." Alexander Hayes returned her smile, though it was faint and reserved. "I hope you don't mind," he replied. "Not at all," Emma said, grabbing a menu out of habit. "Would you like the same as last time?" "Actually," he said, leaning slightly on the counter, "I was hoping you could serve me personally this time, if it's not too much trouble." Emma hesitated, her curiosity piqued. "Sure," she said, gesturing toward a booth in the corner. "Have a seat, and I'll be right with you." As she walked to the kitchen to prepare his order, Emma's mind raced. Why had he specifically asked for her? Was it just politeness, or did he have something more on his mind? When she returned with his plate, she slid into the booth across from him, an unspoken invitation to talk. "So," she began, folding her hands on the table, "I've been meaning to thank you for your generosity. Twice now, you've left something behind that's made a big difference in my life." Alexander looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You don't need to thank me," he said simply. "What you do, how you treat people, it's rare. It deserves recognition." Emma tilted her head, studying him. "You don't even know me," she pointed out. "I know enough," Alexander replied, his voice steady. "I saw how you helped that boy in the rain. Most people would have walked by, but you didn't. You went out of your way to make sure he was safe and fed, even when you didn't have much to give." His words left Emma momentarily speechless. She hadn't realized anyone had been watching that night, let alone someone like him. "It wasn't a big deal," she said finally, brushing off his praise. "It just felt like the right thing to do." "That's exactly what makes it a big deal," Alexander said, his gaze unwavering. Emma felt a strange mix of emotions: gratitude, curiosity, and a growing sense of intrigue. This man, with his polished demeanor and cryptic words, was unlike anyone she'd ever met. But before she could ask more, he stood up, leaving a bill on the table along with a note. "Thank you for the meal," he said, giving her a small nod before heading for the door. Emma waited until he was gone before unfolding the note. Her breath caught as she read the words, "Your kindness inspires me. Don't stop being who you are." The note stayed with Emma long after the man had left. She read it over and over, the words echoing in her mind. "Your kindness inspires me. Don't stop being who you are." It was the kind of affirmation she hadn't realized she needed, a reminder that her small acts of compassion mattered. But it wasn't until the next evening that her world was truly turned upside down. Emma had just finished serving the dinner rush and was wiping down the counter when one of her coworkers handed her a small, elegant envelope. "A guy came in earlier and asked me to give this to you," they said with a shrug. Emma frowned, taking the envelope. It was sealed with a gold emblem, its weight suggesting it contained more than just a simple note. She opened it cautiously, her hands trembling as she unfolded the contents. Inside was a check for $50,000. Her heart raced as she stared at the number, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Along with the check was a card with a simple message: "Use this to make your dreams come true." Emma's knees felt weak, and she quickly sat down, clutching the envelope to her chest. Who was this man, and why was he doing this for her? She thought back to their conversations, his cryptic words, and his insistence on recognizing her kindness. The sheer magnitude of the gift overwhelmed her. $50,000 was more money than she'd ever seen in her life. It was enough to pay off all her debts, cover Mia's education, and still have plenty left over. But the question lingered. Could she accept it? That night, Emma sat at her small kitchen table, the check and card spread out in front of her. Mia, ever the pragmatist, was thrilled. "Emma, this is life-changing," she exclaimed. "You can finally stop worrying about rent and bills. You can actually focus on your dreams for once." But Emma wasn't so sure. "It feels too much," she said, her voice filled with doubt. "I don't even know him, Mia. What if there are strings attached?" Mia rolled her eyes. "If he wanted something from you, don't you think he'd have said so by now? He clearly believes in you, Em. Why can't you believe in yourself?" Emma sighed, her mind a whirlwind of emotions, like deep down, She knew Mia was right. This man, whoever he was, had seen something in her that she struggled to see in herself. And maybe, just maybe, this was her chance to finally take a step toward the life she'd always dreamed of. After hours of deliberation, Emma made a decision. She would use the money, not for luxury or comfort, but to invest in the dream that had kept her going all these years. She would open a cafe, a place where everyone, no matter their circumstances, would feel welcome, a place where kindness would be at the heart of everything. As she filled out the necessary paperwork and began sketching plans, Emma felt a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel so uncertain. It felt full of possibility. And though she didn't know it yet, her decision would lead to another unexpected encounter with the man who had made it all possible. Weeks passed, and Emma's life transformed in ways she never thought possible. The generous check from Alexander Hayes had been the key to unlocking her long-held dream. She spent her evenings poring over business plans and speaking with advisors, carefully selecting a location for her new cafe. While her days at Sunny's Diner continued, she could feel the winds of change stirring. Emma had just finished a meeting with a property agent one evening when she began her walk home. The streets were quiet, bathed in the amber glow of streetlights, and a light drizzle slicked the pavement. Her thoughts wandered to the cafe, a small but welcoming space where she could serve people in need, a place that would reflect the warmth and kindness she tried to live by. As she turned a corner, the low hum of an approaching car caught her attention. She barely registered the sleek black vehicle slowing down beside her until the tinted window rolled down. "Emma," came a familiar voice. She stopped in her tracks, her heart racing. The man she had been wondering about for weeks was sitting there, looking at her with that same reserved yet sincere expression. "Alexander?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He opened the door and stepped out, his tailored coat shielding him from the light rain. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, his tone polite but firm. "I've been meaning to speak with you." Emma's emotions swirled, curiosity, gratitude, and a hint of nervousness. "I think you've already said more than enough," she replied, her voice tinged with humor but carrying an undertone of truth. "The check you left, it changed everything." Alexander nodded, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of resentment or discomfort. "I'm glad to hear that," he said, his voice softening. "But I want you to know I didn't do it for gratitude. I did it because you inspired me." Emma blinked, taken aback. "Me? Inspire you? You're one of the wealthiest men in the city. What could I possibly teach you?" He smiled faintly. "More than you realize. You showed me that kindness isn't measured by what you have, but by what you're willing to give, even when you have little. That night, when I saw you help the boy, I realized how much I'd lost touch with the simpler, but purer parts of life." His words struck a chord in Emma's heart, but before she could respond, Alexander reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I have one more thing for you," he said, handing it to her. Emma hesitated before opening it. Inside was a deed to a small property in a bustling part of the city. "It's yours," Alexander said, his tone earnest. "A space for your cafe. Consider it an investment, not in a business, but in someone who truly deserves to see their dreams come true." Emma's breath caught, tears welling in her eyes. "Alexander, I can't accept this. It's too much." "It's not," he said firmly. "You're not just building a cafe, Emma. You're building something that will make a real difference. Let this be my way of supporting you." For a moment, Emma stood there, the weight of his words and his generosity settling over her. She thought about the lives she could touch, the warmth she could bring to people who needed it most. Finally, she nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I promise I won't let you down." Over the following weeks, Emma threw herself into turning the property into her dream cafe. The space was modest but filled with potential, its large windows allowing natural light to flood the interior. She envisioned warm wooden tables, a cozy reading nook, and walls adorned with photos and stories of kindness to inspire her patrons. Alexander visited occasionally, always keeping a respectful distance. He watched as Emma worked tirelessly to bring her vision to life, her determination and passion only deepening his admiration for her. Each time they met, their conversations grew warmer and a quiet understanding formed between them, a bond built on shared values and mutual respect. One evening, as the cafe neared completion, Alexander invited Emma to dinner. She hesitated at first, unused to the idea of stepping into his world of luxury, but his sincerity won her over. The restaurant he chose was a stark contrast to the modest diners she frequented. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and the air was filled with the quiet hum of conversation and the clinking of fine china. Emma felt out of place at first, but Alexander's calm demeanor put her at ease. Over the meal, they spoke not just about the cafe, but about their lives. Emma shared stories of her struggles, her love for her late parents, and her hope to create something meaningful in their memory. Alexander, in turn, opened up about the loneliness that often came with his wealth and the emptiness he had felt before meeting her. "I've spent so much of my life building empires," he admitted, his voice low, "but none of it ever felt real. Meeting you changed that." Emma looked at him, her heart full. "You didn't have to help me," she said softly, "but you did. And now, because of you, I finally have the chance to do something good." Alexander shook his head. "Because of you, Emma, I may have provided the means, but the vision, the kindness, it's all yours." Their conversation lingered long after the plates were cleared, and by the end of the evening, Emma felt a renewed sense of purpose. A few weeks later, the cafe opened its doors to the public. Named The Hearth, it quickly became a beacon of warmth and hope in the community. Families gathered for affordable meals, strangers shared stories over cups of coffee, and those in need always found a helping hand. Alexander stood among the crowd on opening day, watching as Emma greeted her first customers with a radiant smile. He felt a quiet pride, not just in what she had accomplished, but in the knowledge that he had played a small part in making it possible. As the day wound down, Emma found him standing by the door. She walked over, her apron dusted with flour and her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady and filled with gratitude. "For everything." Alexander smiled, his heart full. "No," he replied. "Thank you." And in that moment, both of them realized that their shared journey, born out of a single act of kindness, had only just begun. The Hearth quickly became a cherished fixture in the neighborhood. From the moment the doors opened each morning, the cafe buzzed with life. Emma had poured her heart into every detail, from the welcoming scent of freshly brewed coffee to the vibrant photographs and inspirational quotes that adorned the walls. It wasn't just a cafe, it was a safe haven, a space where anyone, regardless of their circumstances, could feel at home. Emma implemented a unique pay-it-forward system that allowed customers to purchase meals for those in need. A chalkboard near the counter displayed handwritten notes, a coffee for someone who needs a pick-me-up, a sandwich for a hardworking student. The system flourished, and soon the Hearth became a symbol of kindness, attracting people from all walks of life. One afternoon, as Emma stood behind the counter preparing orders, a young woman approached her. She held a small child in her arms, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I just wanted to thank you," the woman said, her voice trembling. "Last week, I didn't have enough money to feed my daughter. Someone told me about this place, and because of the Pay It Forward board, we were able to eat. You have no idea how much that meant to us." Emma's heart swelled, her smile genuine. "I'm so glad you came," she said warmly. "You're always welcome here." Moments like these reinforced Emma's belief in the ripple effect of kindness. Every meal served, every cup of coffee shared, was a testament to the power of compassion. As the Hearth flourished, Alexander continued to support Emma from a respectful distance. Though he was a man accustomed to commanding boardrooms and negotiating billion-dollar deals, he found a quiet joy in watching her succeed. Occasionally, he would visit the cafe, slipping in unannounced to sit in a corner booth and observe the magic she had created. On one such visit, Emma spotted him. With a teasing smile, she approached his table. "You know," she said, placing a cup of his favorite coffee in front of him, "for someone who claims to hate the spotlight, you sure spend a lot of time lurking around here." Alexander chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Guilty as charged," he admitted. "But can you blame me? This place is extraordinary, just like its owner." Emma blushed but didn't look away. Their connection had grown over the weeks, a steady foundation of mutual respect and admiration. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said softly. "You could have," Alexander replied firmly, but I'm glad I got to be a part of it. Months passed, and the Hearth's impact continued to grow. News of the cafe's mission spread, drawing attention from local media. Stories were published about Emma's journey, her generosity, and the mysterious benefactor who had made it all possible. Though she never sought recognition, Emma's story inspired others to start similar initiatives in their own communities. One crisp autumn morning, Emma received a letter in the mail. It was from the young boy she had helped on that rainy night, the moment that had set everything in motion. His handwriting was shaky, but his words were heartfelt. "Dear Miss Emma, thank you for helping me when no one else did. I found a new family, and they're taking good care of me. I hope your cafe is doing great because you deserve all the good things. You're my hero. Love, Jason." Tears filled Emma's eyes as she read the letter. Jason's gratitude reminded her of why she had started this journey in the first place. She framed the letter and hung it on the wall of the cafe, a daily reminder of the power of small acts of kindness. Meanwhile, Alexander's life had transformed in its own way. Inspired by Emma, he began reevaluating his priorities. He reduced his focus on corporate acquisitions and instead invested in community-driven projects. His collaboration with Emma deepened, and together they launched initiatives to support struggling families and individuals across the city. One evening, as they stood outside the cafe after closing, Emma turned to Alexander. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked, her voice thoughtful. "The rainy one?" he replied, smiling. "I think about it every day." Emma nodded. "It's strange, isn't it, how one small decision can change everything?" "It's not strange," Alexander said, his tone warm. "It's extraordinary, and it's why I believe in you, Emma. Your kindness didn't just change one life, it changed mine, too." Their eyes met, and for a moment the world around them faded away. Emma felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for Alexander's support, but for the serendipity that had brought him into her life. As they stood there, the lights of the hearth glowing behind them, Emma knew that their journey was far from over. Together, they had proven that even the smallest acts of compassion could create ripples that reached farther than they ever imagined. And in her heart, Emma believed that the best was yet to come. Emma Harper's journey from a struggling waitress to the owner of a thriving cafe was not just a story of personal triumph, but a testament to the transformative power of kindness. The Hearth, born out of her compassion and fueled by Alexander Hale's unwavering support, became more than just a cafe. It became a beacon of hope and humanity in a city that often forgot its heart. Every meal served, every smile shared, and every act of generosity reminded Emma that the smallest moments of kindness could spark profound change. What began as a single act on a rainy night had grown into a movement that inspired countless others to give, to care, and to believe in the goodness of people. Alexander, too, found his life forever changed by Emma's selflessness. Her courage and compassion reignited his own purpose, pushing him to use his wealth and influence for meaningful impact. Together, they proved that when kindness meets opportunity, the possibilities are endless. As Emma stood at the counter of the Hearth one quiet evening, watching the chalkboard fill with new pay it forward notes, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She thought of Jason, of the customers who walked through her doors each day, and of Alexander, who had seen the potential in her even when she doubted herself. Her story was a reminder that life's greatest rewards often come from the simplest of choices: to help, to share, to love. Emma had given her heart to the world, and in return, it had given her more than she ever dreamed possible. And so her journey continued, not as an ending, but as a beautiful beginning to a legacy of kindness that would ripple through countless lives, proving once and for all that compassion, no matter how small, could change the world. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey and listening to Emma's story. Your support means the world, and I'm so grateful you took the time to watch the video until the very end. If you enjoyed this tale of kindness, transformation, and hope, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Your feedback and engagement help us grow, and we're excited to bring you more heartwarming content in the future. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.